A knight's armor was a masterpiece of engineering costing a fortune. His war horse was a priceless, highly trained beast. His sword was a work of art, a symbol of his status. And the weapon that defeated all of it, a long, sharp stick. This is the shocking story of the pike wall, a brutal and simple tactic used by common foot soldiers to stop the most powerful weapon of the Middle Ages in its tracks. In this video, we will break down how this infantry revolution turned peasants into night killers and changed warfare forever. Part 1. The myth of the unstoppable charge. To understand the revolution, we must first understand the myth it shattered. The heavy cavalry charge was more than a military tactic. It was a psychological weapon. Imagine being a common foot soldier standing in a muddy field and seeing a line of armored nobles on massive war horses begin to move towards you. First, the ground would tremble. Then a low rumble would grow into a deafening roar. Finally, you would see a tidal wave of steel lances, lowered like the angry tusks of a great beast aimed directly at your heart. The goal was to inspire such terror that the infantry line would break and flee before impact. For hundreds of years, it worked. The charge was the embodiment of the knight's social and military dominance. But this unstoppable force had a critical weakness. It relied entirely on momentum and the psychological collapse of the enemy. If the enemy line did not break, if it held its ground, the charge would stall. And a knight on a stationary horse surrounded by angry men with sharp objects is no longer a predator, he is a target. Part 2. The return of the hedgehog. The pike formation. The solution was a weapon reborn from the ancient world, the pike. This was not a spear. A spear is a one-handed weapon, perhaps 7 or 8 feet long. A pike was a monstrous thing, a polearm stretching 10, 15, even 20 feet in length, tipped with a small, sharp piece of steel. It was too long and heavy to be wielded by one man alone. Its power came from the group. The masters of this new way of war were the Swiss mercenaries. They perfected a formation that the ancient Greeks called the phalanx, and that medieval soldiers simply called the hedgehog. The pikemen would stand shoulder to shoulder in deep, dense blocks. The first 3 or 4 ranks would lower their pikes, creating a solid, bristling wall of spearheads aimed at the chest of any charging horse. No horse, no matter how well trained, would willingly impale itself on this forest of steel. The hedgehog formation was designed not to attack, but to receive the charge, to absorb the full, thunderous impact of the cavalry, and to break it. Part 3. The discipline machine. But the true secret weapon wasn't the wood or the steel, it was the men. The Swiss pikemen were not feudal levies, they were professional, full-time soldiers. They were a brotherhood forged in the harsh, mountainous terrain of the Alps. Known for their fierce independence and absolute discipline, their training was relentless. They drilled for hours every day, learning to move as a single entity. They marched in step turned in unison and lowered their pikes on a single command. Every man's life depended entirely on the man standing next to him. If one man faltered, a gap would open and the entire formation could be destroyed. This created an unbreakable bond of trust and collective courage. This was a direct contrast to the armies of knights who often fought for individual glory and personal ransom. The Swiss fought as one anonymous, terrifying machine. Their goal was not honor, it was victory and payment. And they were about to prove their terrifying effectiveness against the greatest knights in Europe. But before they could prove their tactics, they had to invent a way to counter the knights' greatest advantage after the charge their swords. The solution was as brutal as the pike itself, and it would change the face of infantry combat forever. We'll reveal that shocking innovation after this. Part 4. The Graveyard of Nobility. The Battle of Sempach, year 1386. The battlefield that cemented the legend of the Swiss pike was a field near the town of Sempach. A proud, confident army of elite Austrian knights, led by Duke Leopold III himself, came to crush a rebellious force of Swiss commoners. The Austrian knights saw the Swiss pike formation and knew a cavalry charge would be suicide. So, in an act of arrogant chivalry, many dismounted, determined to tear the peasant wall apart on foot. They were heavily armored, wielding the best swords in Europe. They expected to carve through the Swiss ranks. They were wrong. The long pikes kept the knights at a distance, unable to get close enough to use their swords effectively. The battle became a bloody stalemate. According to Swiss legend, the breakthrough came from a man named Jarno von Winkelried. He supposedly shouted, "I will make a path," ran forward and threw himself onto the Austrian pikes, gathering as many as he could into his own body. As he fell, he created a temporary gap in the Austrian line. The Swiss behind him surged into the breach, and now the second terrifying part of their strategy was revealed. Interspersed with the pikemen were soldiers wielding another weapon, the halberd. It was a brutal combination of an axe, a spear, and a hook, designed specifically to crush, pierce, and pull knights to the ground. In the close quarters chaos, the knights were at a massive disadvantage. Their heavy armor made them slow. The halberds battered their helmets and hooked them off their feet. Once a knight was down, he was helpless. The Swiss swarmed him, using daggers to find the weak points in his armor. Duke Leopold and a huge portion of the Austrian nobility were slaughtered. The peasants had not just defeated the knights, they had annihilated them. The Battle of Sempach sent a shockwave across Europe. It proved that a disciplined, well-drilled force of common infantry could systematically destroy an army of elite aristocratic knights. The age of the individual hero was being replaced by the age of the anonymous disciplined unit. The wall of spears signaled the grand return of infantry as the queen of the battlefield, a status it had not truly held since the days of the Roman legions. It was another critical nail in the coffin of the mounted knight. His charge was no longer unstoppable, and his armor could not protect him from a determined force of common men working together. This story of tactical evolution, where discipline becomes a weapon more powerful than steel, is what we strive to uncover. If you believe these forgotten battles deserve to be remembered, show your support by hitting the like button. And to ensure you don't miss the next chapter in this story, the rise of a weapon that made even walls of spears obsolete. Subscribe to The Knight's Journey and ring the notification bell, because history teaches us one clear lesson.